Hello friends, and thank you for coming back to my channel. My name is Lane, and today we are actually not going to be continuing on with our main series timeline. We're going to be taking a little field trip, and we're going to be visiting one of my favorite side series of the Pokemon universe, that being Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. Now, of course, you can still go ahead and like the other videos, watch the other videos in the series, that being the main series, the Ranger series, the Coliseum series, and the Stadium series, and then watch how they all interconnect, in my opinion, my theories about that. And this one is actually just going to be its own timeline because it's not technically confirmed to be connected to the Pokemon main series, but we're still going to have some fun with it. So it's still going to be lumped in with the timeline series. And with that, like, subscribe, comment, all that fun stuff, and I love to hear what you guys say. Also, you guys have been offering me some great feedback on that stuff, so keep it up. Like, I love to hear from you guys. I love to hear what you guys think. And with that, now let's get started. Stay tuned for the end of the video though, because I've got a fun little theory and I would love to hear some thoughts on it. So this is one of my first original theories. So these games actually, like the first Pokemon Mystery Dungeon game actually came out in 2006, which I have vivid memories of remembering going to Walmart with my mom to get that when I was probably 8 or 9, so I'm showing my age right now, which is fantastic. I love that. But these games really do have a special place in my heart, so replaying them and researching them and getting information for this video is actually a lot of fun. So the main plot points of these games are that you are a human, turned into a Pokemon after taking a personality test. You will partner up with a buddy, and you have to save the world from some overarching threat. If that be a meteor, the primal god of time, you know, a frost creature, or the literal embodiment of all the negative feelings that come from every Pokemon in the Pokemon world. So it's quite a trip usually. Oh, and then not to mention the emotional trauma of being separated from your partner who you've built a really strong connection with throughout your journey, and it's yeah, you usually get ripped away from them. Usually it's a pretty sad experience, and it's great. It's great. I love these games for that. In this series, we do have Red Rescue Team, Blue Rescue Team, Pokemon Rescue Team XD, Explorers of Time, Explorers of Darkness, Explorers of Sky, Gates to Infinity, and Super Mystery Dungeon. Sadly, I'm not going to include the WiiWare games here because my dad never let me have them when I was a kid, and because you can't buy them anymore, and because they're only in Japanese, and I don't speak Japanese. So, if you guys would like for me to make a video about those, let me know. I will do my best to learn Japanese, and I will get on that. When trying to place these games in an overall Mystery Dungeon timeline, my first instinct was to look at the architecture of the buildings, because they do vary pretty drastically from game to game. Looking at the buildings of the Explorer games, I would definitely place this at the beginning of the Mystery Dungeon timeline, due to them having more of a tent or tiki style buildings for residents in their main town, that being Treasure Town. Then I would place Gates to Infinity based off of the large wooden building in their main town, Post Town, which is a step above that simple tent style. I would then place Super Mystery Dungeon because the buildings here in Serene Village have a very solid wooden buildings, and it's more of a sophisticated open concept style than its predecessors. There we go. Finally, I would place the events of Red Rescue Team, Blue Rescue Team, and XD because they definitely have the most sophisticated style of building in Treasure Town, that being more of a clay solid building. Then I realized I have no architecture knowledge or background, so I scrapped that completely. So here's my actual in-game thought process on that. So this theory could work if all of those games happened in the same place, but we do know that that's not true. In Super Mystery Dungeon, we are told that all of these games happen on different continents. So here's a map of the Mystery Dungeon world. We can see that the Air Continent is the location of the Rescue games, the Grass Continent is the location of the Explorer games, the Mist Continent is from the Gates to Infinity game, and the Water Continent is where we start the Super Mystery Dungeon games. This does prove that all of these games happen in the same world, and they are connected to some extent. So, something that does give us a huge amount of evidence as to where these games will end up falling in the timeline is something that we are given in Super Mystery Dungeon, and that of course being the connection orb. The connection orb displays all Pokemon who the player has either met or connected with. Pokemon in the connection orb will post requests when they have a problem they need help with. By completing these requests, the player can expand their network in the connection orb. But now by looking at a completed connection orb, we can see some familiar faces here that definitely do help us put the timeline together. I will say that we don't know for sure who these Pokemon are. Seeing a Pikachu on here could be any Pikachu in the game, or any Pikachu in any of the games. But I think that all of these Pokemon are specifically placed and they have specific connections that definitely give some credence to the lore of these games. And we can even see this because there are Pokemon listed here multiple times. Now I hear what some of you are probably thinking, oh, that's just form differences or it's just gender differences, and you're probably right, but they didn't do this for every Pokemon that has a gender difference or a form difference. Like, we can see that there's only one Deoxys on this entire map, even though there are 4 forms here, and there's only one Meowstic despite there being a gender difference. Each Pokemon here was methodically and purposely placed, and by looking at how and who these Pokemon are connected to, we are able to make lines and draw these connections. To prove this, we can see clumps of Pokemon important to each game. For example, we can see Team ACT connected to Wishcrash from Red Rescue Team and Blue Rescue Team. We can see the majority of Wigglytuff's guild connected from Explorers of Time, Darkness, and Sky. We can see the Post Town crew from Gates to Infinity. And lastly, we can see our classmates from Super Mystery Dungeon. So that does place this Pokemon game at the very end of our timeline. Now sadly, that's kind of the extent of what we outwardly see in this connection orb from one game to another. So if we can look at this one section of the connection orb, we can see that there is a Gengar in it, and it does show us a lot of information. We can see a lot of connections off this Gengar, but there are 2 that I want to focus on specifically. The first one is the connection to Ekans, and this shows us that it is indeed the antagonist from Team Meanies in the Rescue Team games, despite the 3rd member not being present. The other connection that I want to focus on is the one to Gardevoir, which, if you know the story from the original games, Gengar was a human who pulled the tail of a Ninetales and was cursed by the Ninetales. However, at the last second, his Pokemon Gardevoir leaped in and was cursed in his place, becoming an agent of spirit while Gengar became a Pokemon. The game is completed and Gardevoir is freed, but her memory is erased of her time with Gengar, and then we never really get to see or hear what happens to anyone from Team Meanies, that including Gardevoir. If we look at Gardevoir's connections, we can see that she is connected to Lopunny, who is then connected to, you guessed it, a Medicham, making this Gardevoir, Lopunny, and Medicham the exploration team from the Explorers games. So to recap, the Gardevoir who was Gengar's Pokemon was cursed by Ninetales in Red, Blue, and DX, and it is the same Gardevoir that is on the exploration team charm from Time, Darkness, and Sky. So the events of the Rescue Team games happen, she's freed from the curse, she teams up with Medicham, and they leave to form a team with Lopunny. This places the Rescue Team games before the events of the Explorer games. Now, connecting Gates to Infinity is definitely more of a difficult task, because it makes absolutely no reference. It actually doesn't even include the same lineup of starter Pokemon that we have known to love from the first 2 sets of games, with it limiting it only to the Unova starters, Pikachu, and an Axew. So I scoured every corner of the games to see if there's any evidence, and it's pretty sparse. Until I looked at the character that is in almost every game. That's right, our good old storage keeper, Kangaskhan. Now, in the first 2 games, she's just a storage keeper and owner of Kangaskhan storage. However, there was an item introduced in Gates to Infinity, that being the deposit box, that completely replaces her. The item returns in Super Mystery Dungeon, but this time she does still appear in Pokemon Super Mystery Dungeon, where she runs the Connection Cafe, mentioning her previous experience to running the storage. With her mentioning that she had previously ran the storage in Super Mystery Dungeon, the inclusion of the deposit box puts Gates to Infinity somewhere after the events of the Explorers games, but still before Super Mystery Dungeon. So, surprising nobody, these games actually came out in the order that they happen in the timeline. That's starting with the Rescue Team games, the Explorer games, Gates to Infinity, and then Super Mystery Dungeon. But I'm not going to leave it there. Did you think it would? I think that these games actually do connect to the main timeline. Oh no, point of contention, Hear me out. Hear my evidence. We'll get to it. Now, I might lose some people here, but It is assumed that in these games you are transported to a world without humans made just for Pokemon. But how can that be true? The characters in the games are obviously aware of humans, they just haven't heard or seen of one in a very long time. Or it's just assumed that they're in rumors. We have a few locations that are obviously made by humans in the games, like the friend areas that are the power plant and the decrepit lab in the rescue team games, and man-made Pokemon exist here, like Porygon, Mewtwo, Golurk, Voltorb, among many others. Humans were here at some point. We just don't know where they went or where they are. So my theory is that by the time of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, humans are on the verge of extinction. So my theory is that this game happens at the very end of our timeline, thousands of years in the future, so long that land masses have even changed, which I'm aware that plate tectonics would make Pokemon, or make the continents move. It would take a lot longer than thousands of years, but at the same time, Regigigas is a Pokemon and it moved all the continents to where they currently are, so don't really know. He may have just had a bad day and wanted to move things around. So, I don't know. So the map here does look like nothing that we've ever seen before from any other games, and it does make no references to any of the main series games. Oh wait, there's one mention of a location from the main series. So we have an item in the Explorer games called the Coronet Rock. Coronet sound familiar? Its item's description reads, a rock that radiates a peculiar energy, rumored only to exist on Mount Coronet, a place that no one knows anything about. It allows certain kinds of Pokemon to evolve. This directly calls out the location from the main series, that being Mount Coronet in the Sinnoh games, and it still allows the two Pokemon, that being Probopass and Magnezone, to evolve in these games. So with the real world location being referenced and them saying things like, no one knows where it is, this confirms that the location exists somewhere in the world, just nobody knows where it is. So I'm going to go ahead and place this at the very end of our timeline, in the same order that I had them, just thousands of years after the events of Scarlet and Violet. So that's the end of this video. I would really like to know your guys' thoughts, feedback, comments on any of this. I do know that some people think that it's just because you're teleported to the world and maybe an item was teleported with you, but I think it's more fun to speculate that this maybe is you being teleported to a different time. We know that Arceus can do that with Legends Arceus, so maybe you're just being teleported way at a later point in the timeline when someone needs your help. So, like I said, let me know your thoughts, comments, subscribe, like the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you so much for hanging out with me.